From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's coming up. K-State's Art Barnaby awaits to offer his take on who gains and who doesn't from the USDA's Trade Tariff Relief Program. He has run a comparative price analysis for corn, sorghum, soybeans, and minor oilseeds as the basis for his observations. Then highlights from the latest podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. This time, Brad White, Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, and Dustin Pendell are joined by rancher and social media blogger Debbie Lyons-Blythe as they look at a new USDA report on consumer perceptions of beef. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Ward Upham on how to successfully divide daylilies and peonies. Plus more right here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Thanks for tuning in once again. Well, it's been open for business here for just a few days now. The recently announced Market Facilitation Program as part of the Trade Tariff Relief Package that the USDA announced here several days ago. Our guest now has had a chance to look at the workings of this particular program. Art Barnaby, Risk Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, alongside once more. Enrollment is underway, Art. You've done this detailed analysis, and you've found some interesting nuggets within it.
Well, at least trying to provide answers such as why the difference in MFP payments for corn versus sorghum, and why no payments on the minor oilseeds when there's $1.65 per bushel payment going out to soybeans. We should probably correct that. Remember, that's only on half your production. So effectively, it's an 82.5 cent payment for soybeans and a half cent for corn. But nonetheless, that's what they're going to start with. There is a second round, which I think you had the administration in earlier explaining all that. There is scheduled a second round. That doesn't mean they're going to actually make a payment on the second round of payment. They're going to look at where the market is. I believe they said December 3rd, if I remember correctly.
Somewhere in that ballpark,
yeah.
Yes.
And then make a decision whether it'd be a second round of payments and what crops they would go to. And what I'm being led to believe is those payment rates might be different on the second round. So we'll just have to wait and see. We don't have any inside information on that.
One of the hot-button topics, of course, is just what you said, the differential between the various crops in as far as the payment levels, soybeans, corn, grain sorghum, and wheat. And you're receiving questions about that. What is your response to that, Art?
Well, first of all, I'm looking at the data, but if you're a corn grower, you're probably not happy and you don't really care about the data, but I'll tell you what the data is anyway. I'm looking at, first of all, with the soybeans versus minor oilseeds, the data gets a lot thinner there. There's a reason they call them minor oilseeds. Not a lot of acreage nationwide. But NASS does publish a marketing year average price for both sunflowers and canola, and I compared that with the marketing year average price published for soybeans over the past few years.
And stressing that the minor oilseeds are not qualifying for these payments?
No, they do not receive a payment. And at the same time, soybeans are receiving $1.65 a bushel on half their crop. We don't normally price sunflowers and canola in bushels. It's usually priced in cents per pound or price per hundredweight. So I had to convert everything to bushels. Back in 2014-15, we had sunflowers at $3.59 below soybeans. In the next year, it was at $3.07 below. And then in 16-17 marketing year, it was $4.25 below. So it's actually widening out, meaning that sunflowers have been dropping faster in price than soybeans over the past few years. And if we look at this year, now this is a USDA forecast on the sunflowers. And my forecast on the soybean numbers, and we're at $4.11 under. So according to the NASS cash prices, they've dropped faster than have the soybeans, yet it's the soybeans that they're saying has the market damage. Looking at canola and looking at the same data, in 14-15, canola was $1.65 a bushel lower than soybeans, but in more recent times it's been $1.15, $1.17, and 78 cents. Those are actually pretty close to normal numbers. On average, canola trades about $1 lower than soybeans. If the soybean market is dropped by $1.65 as a result of the tariffs, then you would have to conclude to maintain that relationship of $1 to $1.25 lower. That suggests that canola would have somewhere around a 25 to 35 cent loss compared to the $1.65 on the board.
But the program does not account.
It does not account. It does not use that. And to make the argument that all of that is irrelevant, you're also arguing basically there's no relationship between sunflowers, canola, and soybeans. Well, they do compete somewhat in the same market. They're all cheaper than what they were, I can tell you that. Yeah. They've all gone down in price. The only question is which market went down the most, and was that due to tariffs or something else?
And you say perhaps even more curious, Art, is the comparison of how this program treats corn and grain sorghum in this payment setup.
Yes. In the case of corn versus sorghum, they're both feed grains. There's not a lot of difference in what you can do with either one of them, and both of them have had political games played. In case anybody's forgotten, if you go back to 2014-15, we actually had sorghum trading higher, and I'm looking at NAS prices now, cash prices, higher than corn. And in some local markets, if you'll recall, we had cash prices more than $1 higher than corn. That was a direct result of China claiming that the GMO was bad in corn and therefore refused to import corn. They imported sorghum instead, and that bid the price of sorghum up. And the tariff is just kind of the latest example of a government intervention. And when you get governments intervening, then you get some things that look screwy in the marketplace. Right. I'm looking at the sorghum numbers, again, cash prices from NAS, because there is no futures for sorghum. They used corn to hedge sorghum with. But if you look at back there in that 14-15 year, you had prices consistently well above corn, and in some cases, like I said, in local markets, more than $1 above corn. And then we went through a period in the next 2 years where we had the opposite situation where sorghum was quite a bit cheaper than corn. And then we get to this year, starting in September of 2017 was when the marketing year started, and we are now to the end of the marketing year. And during this marketing year, although it hasn't been officially published, looking at the monthly prices between corn and sorghum, they're virtually the same. Some months sorghum is a little lower than corn, and some months are a little higher. I expect sorghum to end up about 10 cents lower than corn. That's just a guess, but the point is the numbers are very close together.
However, the MFP payout is
nowhere
distinctly
close.
Different.
It's nowhere close. It's 86 cents versus a penny on half your crop. That one is a bit of a puzzle, but at the start of 2018, we had some pretty high, strong basis right there in January up to about mid-February. And I don't know, maybe they were making assumptions if we hadn't got into this dispute that strong basis would have continued on sorghum and therefore justified the 86 cents versus a penny. It's as good an argument as you can come up with, and if you're a sorghum producer, you probably like that argument. But nonetheless, it is what it is. Well, we should also mention, too, wheat will get 14 cents. I really didn't do any analysis of wheat because I didn't have anything to compare it to and don't have any idea how they came up with 14 cents, but that's what they will get on half their crop. They can go ahead and do their filing now because they could certify their production, so they could go ahead and cash in the check, if you will.
Again, though, who benefits most from the relief when you boil it all down, Art?
Well, the ones that are going to benefit the most are soybean growers who have a bumper crop. Remember, USDA is forecasting a record yield on soybeans. That means some farmers got some really good yields, and you get paid on all your production for 2018. And they forward priced the crop at something north of $10, which you could have easily done just a few months ago. Those guys are now going to get another $1.65 on top of what they've already forward priced. So they're going to be in tremendous shape. corn guys obviously are the ones that are not going to get virtually nothing out of it, and it makes it easy with the minor oilseeds. The answer is nothing there. So that group will receive nothing out of this program. And then you've got cases that's going to vary by yield. And one of those cases is if your crop was a poor crop or failed. This would be true for soybeans too. If you had a really poor crop and you had a crop insurance claim, first of all, you're not going to get any MFP payment on those deductible bushels. Those are just losses. And if you, for some reason, didn't harvest it all as grain, in other words, it wasn't worth harvesting, the appraised yield from crop insurance also will receive no payment.
It has to be the physical grain harvested to qualify for the payment.
That's correct. And so on corn, that really shows up because a lot of acreage in northeast Kansas that was damaged by drought, farmers chose to go ahead and file the insurance claim and salvage what was left as silage. Now, in many cases, you'll see it around where they've left strips in the field for the insurance company to come back later and do the loss adjusting and actually determine the yield in the field. But MFE is not going to pay on crop-insured appraised yields, and I think that will surprise a lot of people when they find that one out. Now, the good news is, if you want to find some good news here, it wasn't a very big payment to start with because it's effectively a half cent. But nonetheless, FSA is advising folks to go ahead and apply anyway, and the reason is there is scheduled potentially a second round of payments. We don't know what that payment's going to look like yet, even if there was going to be one. What they've said is they're going to take a second look at the market in early December and decide if more needs to be done.
Well, the minute details as this has evolved and emerged have been very important to monitor, and you've captured all of this, Art, in an article that we'd remand producers to for further information on this. It's on the agmanager.info website, going through the calculations regarding the payouts expected from the Market Facilitation Program. Art, thank you for coming over. We appreciate all of this. He's a risk management specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Art Barnaby. And we'll be back with more after this over the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today, and up next, part of the discussion that took place during the latest Cattle Chat podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. This time, the conversation centered around beef consumer trends and perceptions, drawing in part from a new USDA analysis. And for this, a Kansas cattle rancher, renowned for her consumer outreach efforts on social media, joins the cast. Veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson, cow-calf specialist Bob Weber, and livestock economist Dustin Pendell. Here's Brad.
We have a full house here today. Happy to have Dr. Pendell, Dr. Larson, Dr. Weber, and our guest, Debbie Lyons-Blythe. Thanks for joining us this morning.
I'm glad to be here.
Debbie's a cattle rancher, also does a lot of communication stuff, so let you tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump in.
Okay, so I was actually raised in Manhattan, Kansas, on a ranch just south of town, but I live at White City. I met this guy in college, and I'd never heard of the town of White City, population about 500, but we've got a ranch south of town there where we raise registered Angus cattle, sell registered Angus bulls, and then we've got a commercial herd and a heifer development program.
Today we want to talk about consumer perspectives. Dustin, you had some questions. You had done some research on consumer questions, and
yes. So I pulled a report. Title of the report's called "Consumer Balance Time and Money in Purchasing Convenience Foods." This comes out of the USDA's Economic Research Service. They surveyed almost 5,000 households. The national surveys, and so just a couple points, a couple quick questions for you guys. We're talking about the primary respondents who answer these questions, and so we're talking about spending their food budget. So the households that spend more of their food budget on fast food, so the key word here is fast food, tend to be what? Who are these people that tend to spend money on fast food? What the households?
Well, if using
older, younger, those kinds of things.
And
So
I'm going to guess
Some demographic.
I'm going to be guessing it's people with kids in school and 4 different sports and trying to manage a lot of things. I know in our household, a lot of times getting the meal done with all the other things going on when you have kids. So I'm going to say young families.
Younger children, okay.
I'm going to say young families also. I think it's the same reasons. They're you go through the drive-through, and that way you can listen to all of them debate which meal they want.
Yeah.
Debbie, what do you think?
So I guess I agree with you. I think young families very much, but I also think that the generation that doesn't have kids yet are pretty used to zipping through and picking up something. So I think young people specifically, but I think also the ones that are used to zipping by the grocery store every single night on the way home from work.
So we're saying young people with kids or people with young kids, and you're saying just young people, no kids.
Yep.
Weber?
I'd agree. I think it's the combination of, maybe young professionals or people, kind of out of high school, college that may be single, but then, that maybe gets amplified, the percentage of their budget or the amount of expenditure, young families, because we're in the same boat. It's, every night you got something, the dreaded question at 3:00 that comes across my cell phone is, what do you want for dinner? Okay, we've got 30 minutes. It's a trick question. Don't just answer that off the top of your head.
So you guys are right. They sum it up as they tend to be younger, employed, and have children. And they also make another comment that the primary respondents have a less nutritionist diet, which would make sense if you're probably eating.
Sometimes we know that, but we're trading that convenience for the meal, and usually we try to offset that later with a better meal. But
maybe not.
Ice cream after sports.
Yeah. That's the plan. I didn't say we came through with the plan.
And it also goes back to the fact that nobody knows how to cook a pot roast anymore, right? So it's harder to cook a full meal. So if you can zip by and pick up a ready-made pack of beef or something, then you're lucky.
Because you can't plan that at 3:00.
Yeah, nobody can cook the pot roast in 30 minutes for sure, right? Yeah.
So we're going to go back to that, saying those respondents in those households that tend to spend more on ready-to-eat foods. So maybe those pot roasts that you just drop in. So the ready-to-eat foods, who are the primary respondents? What are some of the demographics on those who are ready-to-eat foods? Not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily coming from a fast food restaurant, but maybe it's a grocery store.
A grocery store picked up already, or a Blue Apron, those types of things. Okay.
So what are some of the households? What do they tend to be?
For one thing, I'm going to say those, although they are convenient, they are not inexpensive. And so I would say maybe 2-income households, a little more disposable income for ready-made food.
I agree. I think that may be the middle-aged folks that are picking it up. They're still busy, still have young kids, middle-aged families.
So, age 35 to 55, dual income, some kids at home yet, some affluence.
Yeah, I agree, though, too. But so I might have fit into that category for a while because we didn't have fast food within 30 miles of me. But that's not a big demographic.
So I was thinking what you guys were thinking, but what they found is not that. So they said they tend to be older. They have lower incomes, and they are more likely to be a SNAP participant. So one of those nutritional
food stamps, food programs,
SNAP participants. Yep.
Interesting.
And then by the ready.
They're already ready. They're already ready to eat. And they say that these households tend to live in sparse food environments with fewer supermarkets and restaurants.
Well, and I think we see even in your discussion here, you see a lot of value in the convenience and figuring out those consumer bases that go for that and understanding it, and how do we communicate with them is one of the questions. And as we start talking about advocacy, and advocacy is one of the words that I struggle with a little bit. What does that mean to you guys when we say advocacy for the beef industry? How do you see that in action? And Debbie, I'll start with you and kind of get your opinion on what should we be doing as an industry or individuals, or how do we move that forward?
Wow, what a broad question. So actually, I don't refer to myself as an advocate anymore. I talk about being an influencer, and that's kind of the newest term. And so everybody can be an influencer depending on what their audience, who their friends are, and who are around them. So I feel like it's important that we kind of look at what your audience and who the people are that you can connect with.
But I think part of it is telling the story, and people don't know what they don't know, and often, if you're in that situation, you don't want to ask the question, right? You don't want to seem stupid by asking a question that you think, well, maybe I should know the answer to that. So sometimes telling your story and what you do and how you do it, and that's one of the things you've done, Debbie, is tell a little bit of your story and how you do it. What kind of feedback do you get on that when you tell, this is how we ranch, from somebody that doesn't ranch?
So I think one of the things that we have to do is really look at just the people that we're with every single day. So when my kids were young, we're heading to ball games. One of the things that I would do is take a picture before we headed to a basketball game in the spring when we were calving and say, heading out to the calving barn, going to check on heifers, and if one's in labor, I might be late to the game. So that always would spur then questions, how's that heifer, right? And everybody was interested just to know why I had to check that heifer. Can a cow have a calf by herself? Well, yes, but... And so I find when I talk in general terms like that, it's very well received. And I just feel like that you can find somebody everywhere that you're at.
And would those be people with an ag background or without? I mean, they may not have as much background and understand.
Interestingly enough, a lot of the people in a small town have no ag background. You think of a small town as being very rural. Our little town has what used to be a wheat field behind the school, and the kids didn't know that was wheat growing there. There's so many of them that don't know that. Another place that I really like to advocate is when I do go grocery shopping, I always swing by the meat case. And I may or may not be buying meat because, we've always got a freezer full of beef, right? But I am looking for flat irons on sale. But I typically, if there's anybody else at the meat case, I'll ask them, what are you cooking tonight? What are you going to do with that? And sometimes they know and sometimes they don't know. And that's a great opportunity for a conversation. Dustin, that would be great to, swing by a meat case and just say, man, I love to smoke that cut. That's a great one. And just see if that spurs a conversation with people.
So where do you tend to post this stuff? What media outlets?
So that has changed. That's a tremendous difference. Originally, Facebook still is the biggest draw for my demographic, which is moms, and that is still pretty much where the conversations happen for me. Twitter used to be a big one. I don't get as many good conversations on Twitter. Instagram is great. I really like Instagram, and I think for people younger than me, Snapchat. My kids told me I'm not allowed to get on Snapchat. It's the only one that they can be inappropriate.
But a lot of these have to do with images, too. So do you use images a lot? Do you take pictures of the cattle, take pictures of you working with the cattle?
Instagram is very much images, so it's about the pretty picture. And that draws in the conversation. So, yeah, if it's social media, but I don't want to lessen the impact of face-to-face advocacy, though, too. So social media is great.
Maybe one of the take-homes from this part is many of us picture advocacy as, and you described your experience at the grocery store. When I go to the grocery store, I try very hard not to talk to anyone unless I have to ask where something is. And then I'm moving through. So that face-to-face is not always what I'm doing, but everybody plays a part. We will talk to you next week.
From the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State, Bob Weber, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Brad White, with guest commentator and Kansas cattle rancher Debbie Lyons-Blythe. There's much more to this podcast. Hear it all at beefcattleinstitute.org, beefcattleinstitute.org. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Once again, thanks for joining us. Now, today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the Farm Bill conference talks got underway on Capitol Hill yesterday, lawmakers stressing the need to get the bill done before the end of this month. However, many of the conferees had significant reservations about specific provisions or differences between the House and Senate bills, getting a farm bill done paramount to any other issue or concern, in the words of Senate Agriculture Committee Chairman Pat Roberts, who is working on his 8th farm bill. Roberts said he is committed to compromise. Now, most House Republicans still defend the changes to the work and job training changes to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Costs of the program $80 billion less than projected over 10 years than was forecast during the last farm bill. That was brought out by Senate Agriculture Committee Ranking Member Debbie Stabenow. She pointed out that SNAP cuts and other burdensome paperwork for food aid recipients, in her words, makes no sense to me. Republicans arguing that the U.S. economy is booming. There are 6 million job openings nationally, and the SNAP changes in the House version of the bill would provide training and a chance for more people to work. We owe it to the people SNAP serves to be bold and approve these outcomes, the words of Representative Roger Marshall of Kansas. On other items, Representative Frank Lucas of Oklahoma pointed to the need to increase the Conservation Reserve Program acreage from its current 24 million acre cap. The Senate bill bumps that acreage up from 24 million to 25 million, compared to plans to go to 29 million acres in the House bill, and each does adjust rental rates. And House Republicans also made their case for eliminating new enrollments in the Conservation Stewardship Program and rolling some of its aspects into the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And multiple Republicans also said the Farm Bill should include the House language to repeal the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA rule from the Clean Water Act, which is known as the Waters of the U.S. or WOTUS. EPA had tried to withdraw the rule, but it remains in effect in roughly half the country because of court rulings. Lastly, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle also championed more funding and work to improve rural broadband access, as well as create and fund a vaccine bank to protect the livestock industry. While U.S. and Canadian trade negotiators were hard at work yesterday, USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue was expressing optimism about the talks coming to a good resolution. More on that now from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
U.S. and Canadian trade officials resumed trade negotiations Wednesday.
And we're down to this issue as we thought it may come down to at the end of the day.
One big one, dairy policy. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue telling reporters the U.S. does not have a problem with Canada having some sort of support system for its dairy producers, but
we're simply saying you need to manage the supply and not allow your producers to overproduce, which reduces the international price that our dairy people have to compete with, undercutting them.
Perdue said despite the possibility being talked about of the U.S. going ahead with an agreement just with Mexico,
we would love to see NAFTA restored with both Mexico, United States, and Canada. We believe Canada wants to be a part. We want Canada to be a part of that. It's just a matter of some tough negotiations over issues that we've been very vocal about all along.
And Perdue said he's still optimistic there will be a breakthrough and a three-way trade agreement. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Closer to home, the Kansas Wheat Commission has announced that it's putting its support behind a technology being advanced here at K-State that one researcher says will bring many new discoveries in improving wheat. The university has been working with wheat gene editing since 2014, recently publishing findings of a study in which they successfully increased seed size in a cultivar of wheat. This is the first product that shows that the system works and that we can effectively apply it and affect a trait in wheat in a positive way. Those are the words of K-State wheat geneticist and pathology professor Edward Ockonoff. Gene editing, a technology that gives scientists the ability to improve an organism's DNA, essentially by repairing a gene that is producing an undesirable outcome in the organism. The vice president for research and operations for the Kansas Wheat Commission, Aaron Harries, said that the commission has recently funded the gene editing project in Ockonoff's lab at K-State to identify wheat genes that can be edited to promote improvements in in yield and quality traits. We'll have more on this tomorrow during the Kansas Wheat Scoop with Marcia Boswell. Be listening for that. Now it's time for the Kansas soybean update. Here's Greg Akagi.
Doug Shoup, who serves as the chairman of the Kansas Soybean Yield and Value Contest, joins us. And Doug, the deadline is coming up here pretty soon for any soybean producer who'd like to be a part of the Kansas Soybean Yield and Value Contest.
We still have a few months, but as we start to look out at our bean crop this summer, and we're going to be in harvest before we know it. So we're starting to see a few beans turn around the state, so harvest is actually just around the corner. So it's a good time to start thinking about those fields that I want to enter into the Kansas Yield Contest.
I know one of the big reasons why is to recognize outstanding soybean farmers, but there's a lot more that goes into this contest, too.
Yeah, that's right. I really enjoy the aspect of getting farmers together to try to share ideas and things that we can do to really boost the soybean yield and the quality of our product that we sell overseas. And this is a great little incentive to get guys to think about that more.
What is the deadline for soybean producers to enter the contest?
So everybody who grows a soybean crop is eligible to enter, and we just ask that you have all of your entries filled out and postmarked or delivered by at least December 1st. So we do have a few months here before the deadline approaches, but the best thing to do is to start planning ahead and start contacting our witnesses and letting them know, hey, I'm going to be interested in submitting a yield contest entry, so we'll try to figure out a way to work around their schedule.
And will these be according to the reporting districts?
We have 8 reporting districts, not necessarily aligning with the Kansas crop reporting districts, but we have 8 of our own districts that we divide the state up into based on historic rainfall, productivity of the soil, and just overall yield history for that particular region. Last year, it was an exciting year for Kansas soybean. We had our first 100-bushel yield winner from western Kansas. It was an excellent year out there. It was irrigated beans. We're excited to see the next 100-bushel yield winner.
And if people want more information, can they go to the website?
Exactly, kansassoybean.org, and you can find it, the yield contest entry forms and all the rules under the Association tab, and you can also get a form to fill out for the quality contest as well.
Doug, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
All right, Greg, thanks for calling.
That is Doug Shoup, who serves as the chair of the Kansas Soybean Yield and Value Contest. He's been our guest on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg, and this is Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. For you now on Agriculture Today, our weekly K-State horticulture segment. This is for those of you who appreciate the presence of daylilies and peonies in your home landscape settings. This would be the time to divide those flowering plants, if you are so inclined. We'll talk about why one would want to do that and how to go about it appropriately with Ward Upham. Ward is a K-State Research and Extension horticulturist. And we'll talk of these separately, Ward, but in either case, the first step, you say, in the location at which these divisions will be planted, a soil test.
That's correct, just because they're going to be in place for several years and in some cases may be in place for a long, long time. Therefore, it's an important step in order to get those plants the nutrients they need so that, especially that phosphorus and potassium, can be mixed into the soil because those nutrients don't move. And so if you can do that for either of these plants, that'll go a long way in order to make sure that they're successful.
Daylilies now, why does one need to do this routinely?
Daylilies are tough. They are really tough. And so usually we say divide them every 3 to 4 years just because if you wait much longer than that, they get very difficult to divide. And by dividing them, you keep them fresh. Also, you can share any extra plants with neighbors or increase your own planting, but they're a good plant in order to divide probably every 3 to 4 years.
All right, then. So what's the procedure? How does one go about dividing daylilies successfully?
So there's a number of different ways you can do this. First way, if you've divided them fairly recently, last couple of years, you can just peel off one side of them while the original plant is still in place. That's not going to work if they've been in place for a while. They get too tangled up. And so there's really about 3 methods that you can use in order to divide them. Each of those methods requires that you dig the plant completely up. And so once you've got it dug up, you can either divide them with a knife or a hatchet, and sometimes you have to use a hatchet because they are tough, or you can use 2 spading forks back to back and force those pieces apart. What you're after is a head about the size of a cauliflower. And so that will give you a good division that has enough life in it that it'll be successful. And the third one is kind of a method with more finesse. In other words, you take that clump out, put it on like your driveway, and spray it with a strong jet of water. You get all that soil off, and as you move it around, you can actually cause those divisions to break apart naturally. If you have any problems, if they're too tangled, you can still cut them apart. But often they'll just fall apart, and you can then make your divisions quite easily.
Any of these 3 methods will work because these are durable plants. Folks might worry about roughing them up a little, but that really won't be a problem.
It won't. It won't at all. As a matter of fact, with daylilies, you could divide them now. You can divide them in the spring. You could divide them right after they're done flowering. So you have a number of options with these, but this is a good time to divide them.
So one has succeeded in dividing their daylilies then. How about replanting? What guidelines do folks need to follow?
So prepare your soil. A lot of people add like 2 inches of organic matter to the top of the soil and work it in and then put in their planting. You're going to space those plants maybe 24 to 30 inches apart, and that'll be a good separation from them so that they make a good display for you.
And at what depth do you plant them?
So just look at the original depth. These are simple. Some of our other plants you have to be much more careful, but just look and see what the original depth was and put them in at that depth.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And you have succeeded then, in all likelihood, but water after the planting, right?
That's right. Make sure you water it in so they can get established before winter. If you don't do that, oftentimes they won't root enough, and you may have some problems with them heaving as the soil freezes and thaws over the winter. So get them watered in well, get them established again so that they'll make it through the winter with no problem.
Peonies can also be divided at this point of the season, although division of those flowers is not necessary on an occasional basis. One can go without, you say.
You can. You can leave them in place for years and years and years. The reason people divide them is so they can increase their planting, so they can get more plants from that original. Peonies also going to take a little while for them to recover. They're not going to bloom that next year after they are divided. Eventually they will, but don't worry if you don't want to divide them. They don't need it. But if you want more plants, it's a good way to get them.
And going about this, peonies still may have some foliage on them.
Yeah, and even if you don't divide them, you can take that foliage off now. Okay. Usually mid to late August, that foliage is still green, but it's not doing much. And so if it's starting to look a little ragged, you don't like the looks of it, just cut them down, cut all that foliage off, even if you're not going to divide them. You can get rid of it and make that planting look a little bit better. But if you divide them, that foliage has to go. You need to take it off.
And does one have to then uproot the whole plant to divide as you would with daylilies?
Yeah, you certainly do. And again, as with daylilies, you need to remove enough soil so you can see what that root looks like. You want to make sure that you can see those little pink buds. And that's what you're looking for is pink buds. Those are going to be the growing points that are going to form the new growth the next year.
And how many pink buds are necessary to assure a good resurgence of that plant?
So what you're looking for is at least 3 to 4 buds per division. And where those buds are in relation to the soil once they're planted is critical. You want them about 1 inch below the surface of the soil. You'll still be okay if they're as much as 2 inches below the surface of the soil. Anything more than that, and your plants may not bloom. If they're too deep, you can have peonies that put up nice foliage, but they'll never come into bloom. Space those about 2 feet apart, but then make sure, again, that they're not going to settle too much so that those buds are too deep. And water them in so they can get established before winter gets here.
Any need to mulch either transplanted daylilies or peonies?
If you mulch, that first year a lot of people do mulch. It's not necessary after that, but the year that you divide them, a lot of people will mulch in order to lock in some of that warmth into the soil. That will cause those roots to be more active over a longer period of time to make sure they get established before winter. And again, that's just that first year. After that, you don't need to.
Very good. And the sooner the better, because we have very mild conditions now, obviously. But is it best to get those divided and planted as early as possible?
Yeah, so any time during September is going to be okay. So as long as we're in September, you're okay. You can push that a little bit, but you don't want to get too late or those plants won't establish before winter.
Well, if you're wanting to perpetuate your daylilies or spread out your peonies, whatever your cause might be, dividing those flowers is a project you can take on any time now in the coming weeks and to get those reestablished in their new locations for future growth. And we appreciate the tips on accomplishing this. Ward, thanks.
You bet.
That from Ward Upham. He's a horticulturist with K-State Research and Extension. Along with us for this week's horticulture segment, which you hear each Thursday. And our time is away for today. We will return at this same time tomorrow right here and hope you'll be along with us then likewise. Meantime, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.